There is a kind of silence that doesn't feel like peace. It feels like something holding its breath. Like the world around you has gone completely still, not because everything is fine, but because everything is about to change. That is the kind of silence Linda remembers most from that Tuesday morning in March. Not the loud kind of heartbreak you see in movies, where plates shatter and doors slam and someone screams into a pillow. This was the other kind. The quiet kind. The kind that wraps itself around you so slowly, you almost don't notice it tightening. She was standing in her kitchen, wearing her blue terry cloth robe, the one with the frayed sleeve she kept meaning to throw away. Her reading glasses were on. Her red pen was in her hand. The kids were at school. The house smelled like coffee and dish soap and everything ordinary. And in 3 minutes, 3 minutes she did not ask for, 3 minutes she cannot unlive, Linda's entire understanding of the last 10 years of her life was quietly, permanently, and completely dismantled. She did not go looking for the truth. The truth came to her. It came through a phone left on a kitchen counter, still connected to a call her husband forgot to end when he walked out the door that morning. And what she heard on the other end of that call, the voice, the words, the tenderness in his tone, will make you rethink everything you thought you knew about the people who sleep beside us and call us home. Before we go any further, we want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. We truly love hearing from our community all around the country and all around the world. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. We have so much more coming that you do not want to miss. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Because to understand what happened on that Tuesday morning in March, you have to understand who Linda was long before that day. You have to understand the woman she was before the phone call, before the kitchen floor, before everything. Because Linda was not a complicated woman, and she would be the first one to tell you that. She grew up in a small town called Millbrook, Ohio, the kind of place where the hardware store has been owned by the same family for 3 generations, where people leave their back doors unlocked, and where everybody's business is, in some gentle and unavoidable way, everybody else's business too. She was the third of 4 children. Her father was an electrician. Her mother taught Sunday school and made the best lemon pound cake in the county and never once raised her voice, not even when she had every reason to. Linda grew up watching her parents hold hands at the kitchen table and finish each other's sentences, and she filed that image away somewhere deep and said to herself, quietly, the way children do when they are building their vision of the future, that is what I want. That is exactly what love looks like. She was the kind of girl who made friends easily and kept them for decades. The kind of girl who remembered your birthday not because it was in her phone, but because she genuinely paid attention to people, to the small details of who they were and what they loved and what made them laugh until their eyes watered. She was a middle school English teacher for 18 years, and her students, the 12 and 13-year-olds who were at the precise age when most adults feel the least equipped to deal with them, they loved her. Not in the way students love a teacher who gives easy grades. They loved her the way you love someone who actually sees you. She coached the drama club on Wednesday afternoons. She read every single paper her students turned in and wrote comments in the margins, real comments, not just check marks, but actual thoughts about their ideas and their voices and their potential. Every September when the new school year started, former students would find her in the hallway just to say hello, just to show her who they were becoming, because she had made them feel like who they were becoming mattered. She was, by every honest measure, a woman who held everything together. The kind of woman her friends called first when something went wrong, and called second when something went right, because her reaction, warm and genuine and always exactly right, was worth sharing twice. And she was happy, or at least, she believed she was, which, for a long time, amounts to the same thing. She met Mark Henderson on a Saturday afternoon in June, at a backyard barbecue hosted by a mutual friend named Greg. Mark was standing by the grill, holding a bottle of beer, laughing at something someone had just said. He had dark hair and an easy smile and the kind of posture that made a room feel safe. He was 31 years old and worked in regional sales for a medical supply company, which meant he was charming by profession and steady by nature, or so it seemed. He asked Linda if she wanted the last of the potato salad before he took it, which she thought was the most considerate thing a stranger at a party had ever said to her. They talked for 4 hours that afternoon, about growing up in small towns, about their families, about the books they loved and the ones they lied about finishing. He asked smart questions and actually listened to the answers, which even then Linda knew was rarer than it should be. He called her 3 days later. He said he had been thinking about something she said at the barbecue. Something about how the best stories always leave you feeling a little changed, and he wanted to talk about it more over dinner. She said yes. Of course she said yes. 3 years after that barbecue, on an October evening with the leaves turning gold and the air just cold enough to make her breath visible, Mark Henderson got down on one knee in front of Linda's family home in Millbrook, Ohio, with a ring he had quietly picked out over 3 visits to 4 different jewelry stores. She cried before he finished the sentence. She said yes before he asked, and her mother, watching from the front porch with one hand pressed flat over her heart, said later that it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen in her front yard. That was the beginning. The version of this story that everyone witnessed. The version that made sense. They married the following October, in a small ceremony at the church where Linda had been confirmed at 13. 47 people. White peonies. Her sister sang. Their wedding photo, the one that would sit on the mantle for 10 years, showed 2 people looking at each other the way you hope everyone gets to be looked at least once. Mark's hand on the small of her back. Linda's head tilted toward him, laughing at something only the 2 of them could hear. The photographer said afterward that they were one of the easiest couples she had ever shot, because they were never performing for the camera. They were just genuinely, naturally, unreservedly glad to be standing next to each other. The photographer framed that photo and sent them a copy as a gift. It hung above the fireplace in their living room in Columbus for a decade. Linda dusted it every Saturday. Every single Saturday for 10 years. Their first apartment was small and loud, and completely perfect in the way first apartments always are, the way you only understand in retrospect. A 2-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a brick building near the university, with thin walls and a radiator that clanged all winter and a kitchen so narrow that 2 people couldn't stand side by side without touching. They didn't mind the touching. They cooked together on Sunday nights. Pasta, mostly, because it was cheap and forgiving and left enough room in the evening for a movie on the couch with a blanket pulled over both of them. Mark was a good cook, better than Linda had expected. He made this chicken with lemon and capers that she still, even now, years after everything, thinks about sometimes when she stands in her new kitchen in her new house and tries to remember who she was back then. She tries to remember it without sadness. Some days, she almost succeeds. Their daughter Emma was born in the 3rd year of their marriage. 7 pounds, 2 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and a scream that announced her arrival to everyone on the maternity ward. Mark cried in the delivery room. Really cried, the kind that surprised him, that came up from somewhere he hadn't known was that full. Linda watched him hold Emma for the first time, watched him look down at this brand new person they had made together, and she thought, this is it. This is the thing I will point to when someone asks me when I knew I had built the right life. 2 years after Emma, their son Jake arrived. Quieter, rounder, with Linda's eyes and Mark's chin and a disposition so calm and steady that their pediatrician used to joke that Jake had come into the world having already sorted everything out. They were a family of 4 in a house with a yard in a suburb of Columbus. They had a dog named Biscuit. They went to church most Sundays. They coached Little League. They grilled out on the 4th of July. They were, from the outside, everything an American family is supposed to be. And for 5 years, Linda believed that was true on the inside too. The first 5 years were not without their difficulties. No marriage is. But they were the ordinary kind of difficulties, the ones that bend you toward each other rather than away. Money was tight the year Mark's company restructured, and he was given a smaller territory. Linda's mother had a health scare that turned out to be nothing but cost 3 weeks of sleep and 2 flights home to Millbrook. There were arguments about dishes and schedules and whose turn it was to take Biscuit to the vet. Small things. Human things. The texture of a real life rather than a performed one. But somewhere around year 6 or 7, and Linda has turned this over in her mind so many times since that she has worn the edges smooth, something began to shift. She could not have named it then. She tried, later, to identify the exact moment, the way you try to find the first crack in a wall that has finally given way, and she couldn't. It wasn't a single moment. It was a gradual cooling, a degree at a time. So slow you could convince yourself the temperature hadn't changed at all, that you were just imagining it, that you were being oversensitive, that this is simply what long marriages feel like when the initial heat settles into something quieter, and you should be grateful for the quiet and stop searching for warmth in someone who is standing right there. Mark began traveling more. His territory had expanded again, which was good news professionally, and he was proud of it, genuinely proud, and Linda was proud of him too. But the trips became more frequent. 2 a month became 3. 3 became 4. He would leave on Sunday evenings and come back Wednesday nights or sometimes Thursday mornings, and he would be warm when he returned, attentive, the Mark she remembered, and she would exhale and think, "There he is. I knew he was still in there. I knew I was worrying over nothing." But then the week would move forward and something would close over him again. Some door she couldn't quite see but could feel, and she would find herself sitting at the dinner table watching him scroll through his phone with the screen angled just slightly away from her. And she would remind herself that she trusted him. That trust was the floor you stood on in a marriage. And she would take her plate to the sink and tell herself to stop looking for something that wasn't there. She told her sister Carol about the feeling once. Just once. They were sitting on Carol's back porch in the summer, the kids inside watching a movie, the evening soft and warm around them. Linda said, quietly, like she was embarrassed to hear herself say it out loud, "I feel like I'm losing him and I don't even know where he's going." Carol put her hand over Linda's and said, "Have you talked to him?" And Linda said, "I try." And Carol said, "What does he say?" And Linda said, after a long pause, "He says everything is fine. Everything is always fine." Carol looked at her sister for a long moment and then said, "And do you believe him?" And Linda picked up her glass and looked out at the yard and said, "I want to. I keep choosing to. Because what else do you do? What else do you do when the alternative is a truth you are not ready to hold?" She was not ready, and so she chose not to hold it. She chose to believe in the fine. She rearranged her days around the distance she could feel, but couldn't prove, and she told herself that 10 years of marriage looked different from the first year, that partnership and warmth and companionship were enough, that the version of Mark who reached for her hand at church on Sunday mornings was the real one, and the version who angled his phone screen away at dinner was just tired, just stressed, just navigating a world that asked more of him than he sometimes had to give. She believed this with a devotion that, in retrospect, took far more energy than she ever gave herself credit for. And then it was March. A Tuesday in March. The children were at school. The house was quiet. Linda was at the kitchen table in her blue terry cloth robe with her reading glasses on and her red pen moving across a stack of 8th grade essays about the theme of loyalty in To Kill a Mockingbird. She had made coffee. It had gone slightly cold because she kept getting absorbed in what her students wrote, kept pausing to scribble a note in the margin, kept thinking about how remarkable it was that 13-year-olds, given the right question and the right book, could say things that would stop a grown woman in her tracks. Mark had left for work an hour earlier. He had kissed the top of her head as she sat grating. He had said he'd be home by 6. He had taken his travel mug and his laptop bag and his keys, and he had walked out the door, and Linda had heard his car back out of the driveway, and she had thought, briefly, quietly, "I love him. Even now. I still love him. I just wish I knew where he went." It was his phone that she saw first. Face up on the counter by the toaster, right next to the fruit bowl, right in plain sight. She noticed it the way you notice something that belongs exactly where it is, and therefore barely registers. And then she noticed it differently. The way you notice something that should not be where it is, because her husband always had his phone. Her husband's phone was always in his pocket or his hand or charging on his nightstand. Her husband would sooner leave the house without his shoes than without his phone. She almost texted him from her own phone. She almost just sent him a quick message saying, "You forgot it. Do you need to come back?" She reached for her own phone on the table to do exactly that. And that is when she heard it. A voice. Coming from Mark's phone on the counter. A woman's voice. Soft and close and unmistakable. The call had never ended. He had left in a rush, and the call he was on when he walked out of the house was still open, still connected, still broadcasting into the quiet of Linda's kitchen through the speaker pressed face up against the white tile counter. Linda set down her red pen. She set it down very slowly, the way you move when you are suddenly aware that the air around you has changed. She stood up from the table. She walked to the counter. She stood over the phone, and she looked at the screen. Call in progress. 38 minutes and counting. She could hear breathing. She could hear the soft ambient sound of a car in motion. And she could hear a woman's voice saying something she didn't fully catch, something low and warm and familiar in its cadence. The way voices sound when they have said the same kinds of words to the same person many times before and have stopped performing them and are just offering them now, casually, as naturally as breathing. Linda picked up the phone. She told herself later that she did not decide to pick it up. It was simply in her hand, and then it was against her ear. Her own heartbeat had become very loud. The coffee maker dripped once in the silence. And then she heard Mark's voice. She heard it clearly, the way you hear something when every other sound in the world has gone perfectly quiet to make room for it. He was talking to someone named Diane. He was using her name the way you use a name when it is comfortable in your mouth, when it has lived there long enough to feel natural. He said her name the way he used to say Linda's, in that particular register, low, easy, almost private, like the name itself was a small intimacy. And Linda stood in her kitchen in her blue terry cloth robe with the frayed sleeve, and she listened. She listened for 3 minutes and 12 seconds. And in those 3 minutes and 12 seconds, she understood that the feeling she had been quietly dismissing for 3 years was not anxiety. It was not oversensitivity. It was not a wife's paranoia or a tired marriage's ordinary cooling or any of the other reasonable, manageable explanations she had offered herself on all those evenings when she picked up her glass and looked away. It was knowledge. Her body had known. And now, so did she. The conversation she overheard was not dramatic in the way you might imagine. There were no declarations that would hold up in a movie. There were no thunderclap sentences. What she heard was worse than that because it was domestic. It was the ordinary, comfortable, worn-in language of two people who were used to each other. Diane was asking about something that had happened the week before, something small and logistical, and Mark was answering in the patient and present way he answered people he cared about. And at one point Diane laughed at something and Mark laughed too, and the quality of his laugh, easy and open and completely unguarded, was a laugh Linda had not heard from him in 2 years. Not directed at her. Not in their house. That laugh had been living somewhere else. And she was hearing it now, accidentally, through a phone he'd left behind on a Tuesday morning in March, because he was so accustomed to the life he was living on the other side of their marriage that he had gotten careless. And then came the sentence. The one she could not unhear, cannot unhear, will never unhear for the rest of her life. Mark said, in a tone that was soft and certain and utterly without apology, "Don't worry. She trusts me too much to look." And Diane said nothing for a moment. And then she said, "I know." And they moved on to something else, as casually as you move past a speed bump on a road you drive every day, because to them it was exactly that, a small and unremarkable acknowledgement of a fact they had both long ago accepted and worked around. She trusts me too much to look. He was not boasting. He was not being cruel for the pleasure of it. He was simply stating, to someone who already knew it, a truth he had been relying on for years. Linda's trust, the thing she had considered the greatest gift she could give another person, the thing her mother had modeled for her across 40 years of marriage, the thing she had chosen every single morning when she decided to believe that everything was fine. Her trust was not something her husband was protecting. It was something he was using against her, like a lock he had installed on the outside of a door she didn't know was closed. The call ended 40 seconds later. Linda did not remember those 40 seconds. She did not remember setting the phone back on the counter. The next thing she remembered with any clarity was the kitchen floor. She was sitting on it. Her back was against the cabinet below the sink. Her reading glasses were still on. The red pen was still in her hand, though she couldn't have told you when she had picked it back up. The coffee maker had long gone silent. The stack of essays on the table about loyalty in To Kill a Mockingbird was exactly where she had left it. And Linda sat on her kitchen floor in the ordinary Tuesday morning silence and understood, with a completeness that she said later felt almost physical, like something structural inside her had given way, that her life was not what she had believed it was, that it had not been what she believed it was for a very long time, and that the woman who had trusted too much to look was going to have to decide, in the next few moments and hours and days, exactly what she was going to do with what she now knew. She sat on that floor for a long time. She did not cry right away. People always expect the tears to come first, she said later, and they don't. Not always. Not when the shock is that total. What came first was stillness. A deep and eerie stillness that she described to her sister Carol as feeling like the moment after a car accident. Those few seconds when everything has stopped and your brain is still trying to catch up to your body, and the world is very sharp and very quiet, and you are not yet feeling pain because your system has not yet decided to allow it. That was the feeling. A suspension, like standing at the very top of a fall before the falling starts. She thought about the last 3 years. She thought about the trips. She thought about the evenings at the dinner table with the phone screen angled away. She thought about the time she had reached for his hand in bed and felt him shift, just slightly, just enough to create a few more inches between them. And she had told herself he was tired. She had told herself she was reading too much into it. She had pressed her face into the pillow and breathed through it the way you breathe through discomfort when you have decided that the alternative is worse. She thought about the 4th of July 2 summers ago when they were all out in the backyard with sparklers and the children were shrieking with delight, and she had looked over at Mark, and he was smiling, genuinely smiling. But his phone was in his hand, and his thumb was moving across the screen, and she had actually thought, and then pushed the thought away. Who is so important that you can't put the phone down for 20 minutes on the 4th of July? She thought about the jewelry store charge on the credit card statement. She had asked him about it. He had said it was a client gift. She had believed him. She had believed him and written it into the ledger of ordinary expenses and moved on because that was what she did. She trusted too much to look. When she finally stood up from the kitchen floor, she was not the same woman who had sat down on it. Something had reorganized itself inside her, not healed, nowhere near healed, but hardened, in the way that something hardens when it has been through enough heat. She did not go to the bedroom to cry. She did not call Mark. She did not sit back down at the kitchen table with her essays. She went instead to the filing cabinet in the small room at the back of the house that served as Mark's home office when he was between trips, the room she rarely went into, the room he sometimes closed the door to when he was on a call. She opened the bottom drawer where they kept their financial records, and she pulled out the accordion folder that held the last 18 months of credit card statements. And she sat down on the floor of that small back room. She seemed to keep finding herself on floors that morning, and she started reading. With the same careful attention she gave her students' essays. Line by line, date by date, charge by charge. What she found in that accordion folder was not a single devastating revelation. It was a pattern. Patterns are sometimes worse than revelations, because they require you to understand not just one moment of betrayal but dozens, spread across months and years, each one a small choice made against you while you were in the next room, trusting too much to look. There were hotel charges in cities where Mark had said he was staying at the corporate rate at the Marriott, but the hotels on the statements were boutique properties, the kind you chose for atmosphere rather than convenience, the kind that cost twice as much and came with champagne service and did not appear on any corporate travel report. There were restaurant charges for places she had never heard of in cities she had never been to, dinner for 2 on dates, when he had told her the client meetings ran long and he'd grabbed something at the hotel bar. There was a spa charge. There was a charge for a weekend tour of a vineyard in Virginia on a weekend when he had told her he was presenting at a regional sales conference. And there was the jewelry store. The one he had said was a client gift. The amount, $432, was not a corporate gift. It was not a pin set or an engraved paperweight. $432 from a jewelry store was something you gave to someone you wanted to feel beautiful. Linda put the statements back in the folder. She put the folder back in the drawer. She closed the drawer. She stood up. She washed her hands at the kitchen sink, which she understood was a strange and perhaps inexplicable thing to do in that moment, but which felt necessary in the way certain small acts feel necessary when the large ones are beyond your immediate control. She dried her hands on the dish towel. She looked out the window at the backyard where Biscuit was lying in a patch of sun by the fence, unconcerned and warm and perfectly content, and she thought, somebody in this yard is having an ordinary Tuesday. She envied the dog briefly and completely. Then she picked up her cell phone, and she called her sister Carol. Carol answered on the second ring. Linda said, I need you to come. Carol said, what happened? Linda said, just come. Carol was there in 38 minutes. They sat at the kitchen table, not the back room, the kitchen, because Linda needed the light and the openness and the ordinary familiarity of that space. And Linda told her sister everything. About the phone on the counter. About the call. About the voice. About the sentence. She trusts me too much to look. Carol did not interrupt. Carol did not say, oh, surely not. Or are you sure you heard it right? Or maybe there's an explanation. Carol was the older sister. Carol had lived enough of her own life to know that when a woman tells you she heard what she heard, she heard what she heard. When Linda finished talking, Carol reached across the table and put both her hands over Linda's, and she said, "You are not losing your mind. You are not being dramatic. You are not imagining things. Everything you have been feeling for 3 years was real. You knew. You always knew." And Linda, who had been holding herself together with a precision that was costing her more than she could calculate, finally let go. She put her face in her hands, and she cried. Not the controlled, manageable kind of crying that she had allowed herself on occasional bad evenings over the past few years. This was the other kind. The kind that comes from the deepest part of you. The part that has been compressed and careful for so long that when it finally releases it sounds almost like relief, even when it is the furthest thing from relief, even when it is pure, undiluted grief. They sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours. They went through the credit card statements together, slowly, and Carol wrote things down in the small spiral notebook she always kept in her purse. They talked about what Linda knew and what she still needed to know, and what she was going to do with both. And at some point Carol said, "Do you know who Diane is?" And Linda was quiet for a moment. Because she did know. She had known since the moment she heard the voice on the call, had known and had spent the last several hours trying not to fully acknowledge it. The way you stand at the edge of something high and keep your eyes on the horizon rather than looking down. Diane Calloway lived on Sycamore Drive, 4 streets east of their house. She was 44 years old. She had moved into the neighborhood 3 years ago. 3 years ago, the timing of which sat in Linda's stomach like a stone, after a divorce that everyone on the block had discussed quietly and compassionately over back fences. She had 2 kids, a golden retriever, and a smile that took up her whole face. She had come to Linda's house the previous Thanksgiving and sat at her table and eaten the turkey that Linda had gotten up at 6 in the morning to prepare, and she had said, looking around the warm and full dining room, that Linda had the most beautiful family she had ever seen. She had said it looking directly at Mark when she said it. Linda had noticed that. She had put it away. Carol said, "What do you want to do?" And Linda looked at the credit card statements spread across the kitchen table and the small spiral notebook with Carol's careful handwriting. And she thought about her children, who would be home from school in 3 hours, and she thought about her husband, who was somewhere out there in the world in a car with a dead phone, living the life she had been unknowingly subsidizing with her trust and her belief, and her Sunday mornings and her red pen and her lemon pound cake at Christmas and 10 years of devotion that he had apparently accepted with one hand and spent with the other. And she said, "I'm not calling him tonight. I'm not reacting tonight. I need one more night to think." Carol looked at her sister carefully and said, "Are you sure?" And Linda said, "I've spent 3 years not thinking clearly. I want to think clearly for one more night before everything changes. Because once I say it out loud to him, I can't unsay it. And I want to know exactly what I'm saying and exactly why before I do." Carol stayed until 4:30. She helped Linda clean up the kitchen. She sat with her while she started a grocery list for things they didn't need, just to have something normal to do with her hands. And when Carol's own children needed picking up, she held Linda for a long time at the front door and said, "Call me the second you need me. Day or night. Any hour." Linda said, I know. Mark came home at 6:15. He came through the garage door the way he always did, setting his laptop bag on the bench in the mudroom, calling out her name in that easy, coming home now way he had. He walked into the kitchen and Linda was standing at the stove making pasta. Because what do you make for dinner on the worst day of your life when you are not ready to let anyone know it is the worst day of your life? You make pasta. You make the thing that is simple and forgiving and asks very little of you. He came to stand behind her at the stove, and he kissed the back of her head. And then he produced, from behind his back, a small bundle of grocery store flowers, the kind that come in plastic wrap with a rubber band around the stems, yellow tulips and white daisies, and 1 or 2 sprigs of something purple whose name Linda never knew. He said, "I saw these at the gas station on the way home." He said, "I thought of you." He said it with that warm and easy smile that she had once believed was the most honest thing about him. He set the flowers on the counter, on the very counter where his phone had been, directly over the spot where her life had changed 6 hours earlier. And he opened the refrigerator to get himself a drink, and he said, "Smells good. How was your day?" And Linda turned from the stove, and she looked at him. She looked at Mark Henderson, her husband of 10 years. The man who had fed her potato salad at a barbecue in June and gotten down on one knee in October and cried in the delivery room and coached Little League and shook every hand at church and told the woman he was deceiving her with that she trusts me too much to look. She looked at him with his easy smile and his grocery store flowers and his complete and total confidence that the woman standing in front of him would never know, because she never looked. And she said, "Fine." It was a fine day. The pasta's almost ready. She set the table. She called the children down. She served dinner. She sat across from her husband of 10 years, and she passed him the bread, and she asked about his sales meeting, and she listened to him describe a day that may or may not have existed in any form she would have recognized, and she nodded in the right places, and she did not look at his hands or his eyes or the phone he set screen down on the corner of the table. She was very calm, the kind of calm that comes not from peace, but from decision. She had decided, and she needed one night to be sure. She lay awake beside him that night for a long time. She listened to the sound of his breathing slow and deepen into sleep with the ease of a man who believed he was safe. The room was very dark. Biscuit was somewhere down the hall. The children were in their beds. The grocery store tulips were in a glass of water on the kitchen counter. And Linda lay in the bed she had shared with this man for a decade, and she allowed herself, for the last time, to feel every version of what this was. The grief of it, the rage of it, which surprised her with its heat, the loneliness of it, which did not surprise her at all because she realized now that the loneliness had been there for years, had been the thing she was really feeling all those evenings when she told herself she was imagining things. The relief of it, which was the most complicated and the most unexpected, the relief of finally knowing, of no longer having to manage the dissonance between what she felt and what she was choosing to believe. The relief of no longer having to trust something that was not worthy of trust. She lay there until 4:30 in the morning. And then she got up. She dressed quietly in the dark. She chose her clothes carefully, the way you choose clothes for something that matters. Dark jeans, a cream-colored blouse she had always felt strong in, her good earrings. She went to the kitchen and made coffee and stood at the counter and drank it in the silence before the house woke up. She looked at the tulips in the glass. She left them where they were. And when the sky began to lighten outside the kitchen window, and she heard Mark's alarm go off down the hall, and heard him move through the bedroom and into the bathroom and run the shower, she sat down at the kitchen table and she waited. She was very still. She was absolutely clear. When he came into the kitchen in his work clothes with his hair still damp, she was sitting at the table with both hands around her coffee mug and his phone on the table in front of her. His phone that she had retrieved from the counter the evening before and placed in her bedside drawer overnight. A quiet and deliberate act of preparation that she had not explained to anyone, not even Carol. He stopped when he saw her. He stopped when he saw his phone on the table. Something crossed his face. She had been right. It was not surprise. It was the look of a man who has known for a very long time that a road was going to end and has simply kept driving. Linda said, quietly, without drama, without performance, "Tell me about Diane." What followed in the next hour and 45 minutes was not a clean or simple conversation. It never is. Betrayal does not unravel in a single thread. It unravels in layers, and each layer reveals another beneath it. And you have to keep pulling even when every instinct in you is screaming to stop, because you have learned, finally and permanently, that not knowing is not the same as being safe. Mark did not deny it. He sat down across from her, and he looked at his hands, and he began to talk. And as he talked, Linda learned that what she had overheard on that Tuesday morning was not the whole story. It was the surface of a much longer one. The relationship with Diane had begun approximately 2 years and 8 months earlier, which meant it had started just 4 months after Diane moved on a Sycamore Drive with her golden retriever and her full-face smile and her Thanksgiving gratitude for Linda's beautiful family. It had begun, as these things so often do, with proximity and opportunity. They had both been at a neighborhood block party. They had both stayed late helping to clean up. They had talked and then kept talking, and Mark had told himself, the way people tell themselves these things, that it was nothing, that it would go nowhere, that he had it under control. But it had not gone nowhere, and he had not had it under control. It had grown, steadily and carefully, over almost 3 years, into something that required hotel rooms in other cities and boutique properties chosen for atmosphere and $400 jewelry charges filed as client gifts. It required the angled phone screen at the dinner table, and the calls that started before he left the house in the morning, and the business trips that were sometimes genuine and sometimes not, and the very particular kind of domestic performance that a man must sustain when he is running two lives in parallel and cannot afford for either one to see the seams. And Linda asked the question she had been building toward all morning, the one she had rehearsed in the dark beside him while he slept. "Did you ever think about leaving?" And Mark was quiet for a long time. And then he said yes. He said that about 18 months ago, he had thought about it seriously. He had looked at apartments. He had almost said something. And then Linda asked, "What stopped you?" And Mark looked down at his hands again and said something that she would spend years turning over and never quite finishing with. He said, "I wasn't sure I was ready for everything to change." Linda looked at him across the kitchen table where she had graded papers about loyalty in To Kill a Mockingbird just one morning ago, and she understood. He had not stayed for her. He had not stayed because he loved her, or because he chose her, or because 10 years of marriage and 2 children and a dog named Biscuit and Sunday mornings at church meant enough to him to fight for. He had stayed because leaving was complicated and expensive and would require him to become someone who had to fully account for the choices he had made. He had stayed because inertia is sometimes mistaken for commitment, and because she had made it so easy, had kept the house and the children and the coffee and the pasta and the Easter baskets and the Christmas lemon pound cake and the dusted wedding photo above the fireplace. Had kept the whole infrastructure of his real life maintained and running so smoothly and so graciously that disrupting it had never been quite inconvenient enough to force a decision. She trusts me too much to look. He had not stayed because he loved her. He had stayed because she was too good at making it easy for him to stay. Linda stood up from the table. She straightened her cream-colored blouse. She looked at the man she had married for the last time in that particular way. The way you look at someone when you are memorizing the end of something rather than reaching toward the continuation of it. And she said, in a voice that was steady in a way she would be proud of for the rest of her life, "I want you out of this house before the children come home from school today." She did not say it with cruelty. She did not shout it. She said it the way you say something true that cannot be argued with and does not require argument. And then she picked up her keys from the hook by the door, and she walked out to her car in the driveway in the cold March morning, and she sat behind the wheel, and she did what she had not allowed herself to do in front of him, not once in all those hours. She cried. She cried for a long time in the driveway of the house she had built with someone who had been quietly building something else. She cried for the woman in the terry cloth robe who had been sitting on the kitchen floor just one morning ago. She cried for the girl in Millbrook, Ohio, who had watched her parents hold hands at the kitchen table and decided that was what love looked like, and had spent the next 25 years trying to build it, and had ended up here, in a cold car in a quiet driveway, with grocery store tulips on her counter and a 10-year marriage over before the school buses ran. She cried until she was empty, and then she wiped her face, and she started the car, and she drove, because that is what you do. That is what women like Linda have always done. You cry until you're done crying, and then you drive. What happened in the weeks after that morning is a story that takes longer than a single conversation to contain. The children were told, carefully and gently, by both parents together, in the living room under the wedding photo that still hung above the fireplace. Emma, who was 9, cried and asked questions that broke Linda open all over again. Jake, who was 7, was very quiet and then asked if Biscuit was going to have to move too. Mark moved into a furnished apartment 20 minutes away. Linda's mother drove up from Millbrook and stayed for 2 weeks and made lemon pound cake, and didn't say anything Linda didn't want to hear, and simply occupied the house alongside her daughter the way a good mother does, as ballast, as warmth, as proof that you are not alone even when the person who was supposed to be there isn't. Carol came over almost every day. Linda's friends, the ones she had kept for decades because she paid attention to people, showed up with food and wine, and the particular quality of female friendship that holds you up without making you feel held, without making you feel fragile, without asking anything of you except to let them be there. She went to therapy. She found a woman named Dr. Patricia Warren, a therapist who specialized in betrayal and marital trauma, and she sat across from her in a small, warm office every Thursday afternoon for 2 years. She talked about Mark. She talked about the phone call. She talked about the credit card statements and the grocery store flowers and the way he had kissed the top of her head the morning he forgot his phone. She talked about the sentence. She trusts me too much to look. She talked about what it meant to rebuild trust in yourself after the architecture of your life has been constructed on a foundation that was, it turned out, not what you had been told it was. Dr. Warren told her once that the thing people rarely understand about betrayal is that the deepest wound is not the discovery of what someone did. It is the discovery of what you almost missed. The recognition that your instincts were right all along, and you had talked yourself out of them so many times and so thoroughly that you had almost permanently lost the ability to trust them. The work, Dr. Warren said, was not just grieving what you lost. The work was learning, slowly and patiently, and with enormous gentleness toward yourself, how to trust the part of you that already knew. Linda joined a support group that met on Tuesday evenings at a community center not far from her house, which she found darkly and somewhat comfortingly ironic, given what Tuesdays now represented in her personal history. The group was called New Footing. It was made up of women who were rebuilding after the end of marriages, some through divorce, some through death, some through betrayal, some through combinations of all three that made Linda's story feel, occasionally, relatively uncomplicated. She sat in a folding chair in a circle with these women every Tuesday evening for a year and a half, and she listened to their stories, and she told pieces of her own, and she understood something she had not fully understood before, that the particular loneliness of being deceived within a marriage, the loneliness of being the last one in the room to know, is one of the most isolating experiences a person can have, and one of the least spoken about, because it comes wrapped in so much shame, that most women spend years managing it privately before they can say it out loud. The group gave her a place to say it out loud. The group gave her back her voice. She started writing. It began as journaling, private and unpolished and full of the kind of raw and unedited thinking that is only possible when you are certain no one will read it. She wrote about the phone call. She wrote about the kitchen floor. She wrote about the dinner table and the bread she had passed and the way she had smiled. She wrote about the driveway in the cold March morning. She wrote about what it meant to trust someone too much to look and what it cost, and what it was like to have to learn to look again at everything, starting from the beginning, starting from yourself. She wrote about her children and what she wanted for them, and what she wanted to model for them, and what she wanted Emma, in particular, who was growing up in the particular world that girls grow up in, to understand about trust and self-knowledge and the enormous difference between faith and willful blindness. She wrote about Millbrook, Ohio, and her parents' hands on the kitchen table and the vision of love she had carried since childhood and what it meant to have to revise that vision without abandoning it entirely, to be able to say, I still believe in that. I still believe love can be what I was promised it could be. I just need to build it with someone who is actually there. And then, 6 months after she began writing privately, she shared a piece of it publicly. Not much. A few paragraphs on a personal blog she had started without any expectation that anyone outside her own life would read it. She wrote about the morning, about the coffee going cold, about the phone on the counter, about the 3 minutes. She published it on a Wednesday night and went to bed and woke up to 412 comments. From women in Ohio and Texas and Georgia and California and Michigan and Minnesota and every corner of this country, women who said, I know this feeling. I know this kitchen floor. I know this particular silence. I thought I was alone in it. I didn't know anyone else had ever felt exactly this. That first blog post became several. The several became a regular column. The column became a community. And the community became, in the way that the best unexpected things become, a reason to keep going and a proof of life, and a reminder that telling the truth about what happened to you, the ordinary, devastating, utterly human truth, is one of the most powerful acts available to a person who has spent years inside a silence that was never hers to keep. This is Linda's story. Her names have been changed. Her details have been adjusted to protect the lives of those involved, including the children who deserve the privacy of growing up without carrying their family's history in every direction they walk. But the essential truth of what happened, the phone, the call, the 3 minutes, the kitchen floor, the 10 years, the Tuesday morning in March, that is real. It is documented. It is one woman's experience that turned out to belong, in its deepest emotional architecture, to thousands. Because this is the thing about betrayal that nobody tells you when you are in the early, golden, impossibly hopeful beginning of a marriage. It does not always arrive as a dramatic revelation. It does not always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives in the form of a phone left on a counter. Sometimes it arrives because someone got careless, because they had been so confident in your trust, so certain of your willingness to look away, that they stopped being careful. And sometimes the truth, when it finally comes not because you went looking for it, but because it simply could no longer stay hidden in a house that was kept too quiet and too clean and too whole by the woman who lived in it. Linda is 52 years old now. She still teaches the same 8th graders in Columbus. Her students still find her in the hallway between classes just to say hello, just to show her who they are becoming. Emma is 17 and applying to colleges and wants to study journalism, which makes Linda feel something she does not have a precise word for, but that lives somewhere between pride and poetry. Jake is 15 and has his mother's eyes and his grandfather's steady disposition and a gift for carpentry that would have surprised everyone 5 years ago, but surprises no one now. Biscuit is old and slow and still finds the best patches of sunlight in the backyard. Linda's kitchen is different now. A smaller house, brighter, with plants on the windowsill and her mother's lemon pound cake recipe written out in her own handwriting and taped to the inside of the cabinet above the stove, where she can see it every morning when she reaches for her coffee. She goes to therapy less frequently now. She still writes. She still shows up on Tuesday evenings sometimes. Not because she needs the group anymore, but because occasionally a new woman walks into that folding chair circle with the particular look of someone who has just stopped managing something alone and needs to know she is not the only one. And Linda likes to be there for that. She likes to be the person across the circle who says, without drama and without performance, I know that floor. I know that silence. You are not alone in this. You were never alone in this. And I promise you, that the life on the other side of this morning is yours to build. It is smaller at first, and it is quieter, and some mornings it is nothing but the sound of your own coffee maker in your own kitchen and a red pen and a stack of papers and the simple, irreducible fact of your own presence in your own space. And that, as it turns out, is enough to begin. She trusts me too much to look. That was what he said. But here is what Linda would tell you now. If you asked her, if you sat across from her in her bright kitchen with the plants on the windowsill and the lemon pound cake recipe on the inside of the cabinet, and asked her what she wants other women to take away from the story that started with a phone left on a counter on a Tuesday morning in March, she would set down her coffee mug and look at you for a moment, and then she would say, the next time your gut tells you something, and it will, it always does, it has always been telling you, quietly and persistently, and with a patience that outlasts every excuse you give it, do not trust too much to look. Look. You are allowed to look. You deserve to look. And what you find, however hard it is to hold, will never be worse than what it costs you not to know. Drop a comment below. Have you ever felt something was off but ignored it? Hit subscribe, share this with someone who needs to wake up, and stay tuned. Because our next story is even more unbelievable. You won't want to miss it.